Remy, can they hear me?
Yes.
Sure them. Remy, is my audio coming through?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, and welcome to this meeting of the Charlottesville Civilian Oversight Board. My name is Jeff Frazier. I am
Jeff, we're
the
gonna,
acting chair of the board,
hey Jeff,
and I would like to,
Jeff, hold on for 1 minute, a few minutes, we're gonna, is Sam supposed to be coming? Sergeant? Wait a few minutes, Sam is on his way, so if you can wait a few
okay,
minutes.
Mr. Mayor, not a problem.
Thank
I'll
you.
just sit tight. Thank you.
Y'all start your meetings on time, all right?
I apologize for not being
No,
there in
no.
person.
Yeah. Hey, James, how you doing, sir? Sam? No?
Are we good to go, Mr. Mayor?
I think we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm Jeff Frazier. I'm the acting chair. And I'd like to welcome our distinguished guests tonight, um, Mayor Wade, Councilor Pinkston, Councilor Oshrin, I believe that's Councilor Snook, and Councilor Payne is joining us virtually. City Manager Sanders, I believe Deputy City Manager Marshall is with us. Am I leaving anybody out? And then our board, Mr. Dillard is with us virtually, our law enforcement rep. And then also Dr. Dobson and Mr. Fry from current members of our board. Did I leave anybody out, James? I can't see clearly the whole room from here.
Yes, I think you have a cover. I just want to let you know that Deputy City Manager Freeze is here as well.
Okay, welcome,
and-
Deputy Manager.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
And-
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll call our meeting to order. Just would like to note that, as you said, Councilor Payne is with us virtually. We don't have to vote on that, but I just want to make it become let it bring to your attention. This is our a joint meeting with the City Council and the Police Civilian Oversight Board on September the 11th, 2025. Madam Clerk, do you want to call the roll? Thank you.
Mayor Wade,
Here.
Vice Mayor Pinkston,
Here.
Councilor Oshrin,
Here.
Councilor Snook,
Here.
Councilor Payne.
Here.
Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please say no. And we have approval of the minutes. Not possible to, okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I could interrupt, we, as a board, cannot vote on our agenda or our minutes from prior months because we don't have a quorum. So we've been waiving those items, just noting them, but waiving them. And I'm not sure if council wants to take any action with those items at this point.
Right, so this agenda and motion, is that for the PCO or us? Oh, I'm sorry, so.
That's our PCOB agenda I was referring
Right,
to.
I'm sorry. Okay, so we'll just move on before we get into the presentation, if there are any announcements. Okay, if not, we'll get into the presentation and discussion of staff recommended ordinance revision. And are you taking the lead on this, or?
Yeah, I'm just going to make a comment.
Okay,
So, good evening, everyone. Just thankful for the opportunity to be here. I thought it was important for me to be able to express to members of the public as well as to the PCOB board that conversations that have occurred up to this time with council have all been pretty much aimed at the idea of whatever reboot is needed, we are ready to do so. Make sure that we can get the this body to wherever it needs to be able to function. I will dispel any myths and rumors about ending the PCOB that has not been discussed, that is not a part of the conversation. The plan that we have for this evening is for Mr. Walker to walk you through a series of proposed edits, changes, revisions to the ordinance. And the goal would be all in the spirit of getting this body to be able to function, to do the job that it was founded to do. Whatever that may take, I think is the work that we see ahead, but ideally the intention is that we will move forward. We'll take whatever items for action, bring those back to council in future meetings, and there'll be further discussions as that comes up. But I'm going to stop there and I'll turn it over to James.
Thank you.
All right, good evening. My name is James Walker. I am currently acting as the Executive Director for the Police Civilian Oversight Board. Good evening to the council members for joining us, Mayor Wade, and then our board members as well, and members of the public and the community. So what I have prepared for you is a series of slides that detail some initial changes to the, or recommended changes to the ordinance. These focus on some specific items, so I'm hoping that the screen will move away. Maybe it's better for...
And you also have it in front of you. Well, we see the body of it, so.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it to go away, so it's...
Uh-oh.
I think it might clear here in a second, because it's delayed, what I see on
oh,
mine.
yeah.
Remy, would it be better for you to bring it up? Thank you. If you would just, yep, that's perfect. So tonight just focuses on staff recommendations that emphasize a couple key items that are really focused on the operations of the office as an entity, basically allowing this office to function a little more autonomously from the board, but on behalf of the board. And so the goal is to clean up some of the language, the wording that restricts the office from carrying forward actions. As of right now, the office is basically tied to votes of the PCOB. Well, the PCOB does not have a quorum, and therefore it is very difficult for the office to take actions on anything. So these recommendations I broke into 3 different categories. The first category, which I identify in the red line version in that gold box, that's specific to the creation of an Office of Police Civilian Oversight and the role and duties of the director. The blue box is items that may have revisions but also move from one location in the ordinance to another. And then the green box are items that stay in place but have revisions to them. And so if we think about it in these 3 types, the reason I classify them this way is because the gold box is probably the biggest changes, and we'll look at those first. And the blue just helps indicate where things are moving to and from. So if you see a blue box in one location, you'll see the same content somewhere else where it was struck and moved to that new location. Oh, perfect, thank you. Let me actually go to my slide that way. So this first slide just talks about some universal recommendations. These ones are not identified with those color-coded boxes, and that's because they extend throughout the entire ordinance, those recommendations. So the first one is changing executive director to director, and that's simply to bring it into consistency with the organizational structure of the rest of the city. I believe this is the only position that has an executive director title. Every other role in the city is director, including Office of Human Rights. And I used Office of Human Rights to guide some of this language because they are one of the entities most similar. Recodification, I didn't make any boxes around this. This is me updating the codification as you go through the document to make sure that it stays consistent. And that's important because when I'm referring to where things are moving or what is being revised, I want to make sure that we're in the right place and everyone can find the information easily. References to the Office of Police Civilian Oversight will simply be referred to as the office. So any of those changes are not mentioned or identified in a box, a color-coded box. And then finally, the revisions that are specific to grammar, syntax, word flow, or revisions that were identified before and then maybe they occur again. I'm just not putting boxes around those to highlight them any longer. And I'll give a perfect example of this. Later in the discipline section, there is the word there, T-H-E-I-R, and it really needs to be the word the. So I didn't mark that with a box, I just fixed it. You can see the red line, but I didn't point that one out. All right. So first to focus on the establishment of the office. This is by far the largest section of changes. And if you'll notice in the red line version, the very first page just has a gold box that says establishment of new section, see presentation details. The goal was to basically set this one aside so we can focus on that first, and then we'll go through the others. The main bulk of this is actually on page 6, I believe, of the ordinance. Yes, page 6. Page 6 includes the existing language of the executive director. And so basically we did some, my recommendation is to do some revisions to that existing section and then sandwich it between some additions that go at the top of that and the bottom. Those additions I have included in the slides. They'll come in the next couple slides. But just to first talk about the revisions to the existing section on the executive director, that's what's presented on the screen here. So establishing the recodified 452, moving that basically up to the front of the ordinance, and calling it the Office of Police Civilian Oversight. And this reflects what the Office of Human Rights has. So their language and the language that I put in here is identical in that sense, just changing out the name of the board. Duties of the city manager and duties of the director, these are added sections for clarification. This section includes a lot of stuff that indicates what the city manager will do and what the director will do, so it made sense to kind of break them down into subsections that fall under that office. And then we're moving the operating procedures up. Now, this is a key point, and this is a key recommendation. The state code indicates that the governing body of the city is to approve the operating procedures. However, what we're asking is that the governing body delegate or give consent of that process to the city manager. The reason being is the operating procedures are an 80-page document. They are significant. There are a lot of concerns with them, and they are currently voted on by city council. As an example, there are sections in those operating procedures that don't even have complete sentences. It's like the sentence stopped in the middle of the sentence, and there are many other conflicts that exist internally within that document, as well as with other documents. So we recognize that there will need to be changes to that, and that would make that process a little smoother. Once the ordinance is cleaned up, the operating procedures can then follow. And then finally, revising and striking the section on the duties of the director. You'll see kind of some changes that were made there, basically focusing on giving the office the ability to operate independently under the city manager on behalf of the board. So not changing any powers of the office, not changing any powers of the board, basically saying that the office can carry out the activities that the board is empowered to do on their behalf, which is already what is occurring anyways. It's just saying that focusing on it's not coming every action by a majority vote of that board. I always made sure to include language in there recommending that not only can the city manager authorize an action, but that the board by majority vote can authorize an action of this office. So it doesn't take any power away from the board. It's just indicating if the board is not able to vote due to lack of membership, the office can still operate. So that was the main goal of that section. I'm going to pause after this slide, and we'll stop there, and if there's any questions before we move on. But this one is to move, revise, and strike the director's authority to conduct audits. This is an item that already existed in the ordinance. It's just bringing it up under the executive director. It was in a further location way down. And again, same sort of language that gives more autonomy to the office to conduct audits without having to get a vote from the board, but the board can still vote if they have something specific that they would like to audit. And then I also struck some unnecessary language in that one. So you can see those, that one's in the blue box there at the bottom of page 6. And then finally, just adding some sections to the top and bottom of this whole section and moving it all to the front. So if you notice at the top, there's number one, appointment, number 2, interview process. Basically, we're adding an A and a B above those. You'll see duties of the city manager start at C. That A and B, I have the language on the next slide, so we'll look at that. I'm just letting you know we're adding in 2 sections at the top, and then 1 section at the very bottom. Duties of the director, there's a 1, a 2, this would add a number 3. And I also have that language in the following slides. So I will pause there just to say if there's any discussion or questions about what currently exists in that executive director section on page 6. And that way I can maybe answer those, or if you see any details that we want to look into.
Yeah, I just had a question. When you talked about that the director has the authority to conduct an audit, but you also said that we want to kind of bring this into line with other city departments. So, I mean, maybe this is for Sam, is that something like the HR or other departments, they can conduct audits? I thought that the whole city is like audited, I don't know, annually, you know, when we. Is it-
Yeah, sorry. That's a different type of audit. What we're suggesting here is the type of audit that we want to be able to do would be going in and taking a look at practice, taking a look at history of performance, and being able to question what it is that we're seeing, what trends do we see, what questions, what problems might arise, do the analysis on that, bring that back for review, engage CPD in a review of that as well. If it comes to that, that's what constitutes an
Okay.
audit. So
Okay.
very different than, you're talking more like a financial audit. Everybody plays in that space, yes.
And to give a perfect example of that, the automated license plate reader system, Flock, that would be an example of something, a system that could be audited against the CPD's policy. Here's how the system is meant to be used. We can audit it to see if it's being used in that way. That's an example.
Okay. Other,
And, sorry, Mayor, if it's also helpful, this also, all of these changes work to bring, again, more alignment with the powers that the Human Rights Commission and their office have been bestowed. One of the benefits that I saw in some of the changes to the duty of the director is that currently your police civilian oversight board staff have been working, for example, hand in hand with your Human Rights Commission on issues that may arise as a human rights complaint. So they were not a part of a PCOB submission, but it might involve something there. And so this would give the office the ability to request from the city manager that they go in and audit independent of a actual, case coming to the PCOB, but also your city manager, through his work and activities in the community, may hear something and want a third party to go look at something. The way that all of this was previously written, it didn't allow for that. And I think that flexibility will be helpful and may actually uncover some additional policy items that your Police Civilian Oversight Board may want to take a look at that would not have been brought up before because there was no complaint attached to it.
other clarification questions on this part so far? Nick?
Before we move, I would also just like to say that this recommendation in regards to establishing an Office of Police Civilian Oversight, I wholeheartedly support as I'm working to just really evaluate structure, organizational process, flow, and all of that. It is apparent to me that it does make sense. It does create that parallel effort with the Office of Human Rights and the single executive director within the entire city of Charlottesville has never made sense. So being able to just clean that up and make it parallel to others, we did a whole job description project and we had to keep that job separate because the ordinance states it that way. So those are two basic cleanup things. And again, not attempting to take away anything, but just to go ahead and put those positions and that office in parallel to all the others that exist today.
I actually do have a quick question. Is this the first time, or is this meeting and this being on the agenda the first time the PCOB members have seen these revisions? Or did you
Yes,
have it before this?
they were sent the revisions a couple days ago, yes.
Got it,
That's,
okay.
that's the first time that they have been put together in this format.
Okay, thank you.
And I would say this is probably the 5th or 6th version of looking at changes, because we've been looking at changes repeatedly. Ms. Gonzalez did that a few times as well.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just add quickly, Mr. Walker and I spent considerable time the last 2 weeks going over it in my position as acting chair. So it was familiar to me, and then we distributed it to the current members of the board.
Thank you.
Got it, thank you.
I forgot, Michael, did you have anything?
I know at this time, no.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just to go to the next slides, these show the new language that would be added to this section. And so you can see add Part A, which would say office established. This language here just follows what the Office of Human Rights follows. Hereby established an office. I don't need to read it to you, but just know that that's where that language was pulled from. The second, Part B, same thing, came from the Office of Human Rights language, just indicating that there's a full-time director. The director is responsible and reporting to the board on the day-to-day activities of the board and the office, and that the director reports to the city manager. So this is basically just following that same language, same guidance that the Office of Human Rights has in their existing ordinance. And then finally, the section that is most different, this would go as Part D, number 3, at the very bottom of that section. Director's authority to engage in oversight activities on behalf of the board. So this is really the meat of indicating, hey, the director can carry out these duties independent of the board, but can also be directed by a majority vote of the board. And I list some of those activities. And the reason I do that is because I am currently engaging in those activities. So this may include, but is not limited to, review of department systems, like the Flock license plate reader system, attendance at department meetings, like their CompStat meeting, review of department policies, which is something that is done regularly, and then things like interview panels. I at this time, participate on interview panels for officer recruits. I'm part of that process, evaluating recruits that are slated to go to the training academy. And then as well in a use of force panel. It is written into the use of force ordinance, or general order of the CPD, that we participate in those and give an opinion on uses of force by the police department. So those are examples, and the goal in this language was to make it clear that those activities should be connected to the board, should be brought back to the board and reported out to the board, and that they could also direct those activities, but that the director is engaging in them independently.
Mr. Walker, if I could just add with something you and I discussed, which is that when the complaint comes in, the examination of the complaint materials is very time intensive. Body cam footage, witness statements, and so forth. So what he and I discussed was that the office would actually put together a packet where they would review body cam footage, pull out the salient sections, likewise with any written materials, and then present to the board a condensed but comprehensive version of the complaint, so that we don't have to spend as volunteers hours upon hours reviewing that material individually. So that would come under this as well, would it not, Mr. Walker?
It would, and that goes into some detail. There's actually details about that later in the ordinance.
Okay, I didn't mean to.
That specifies that, and that is also where the operating procedures say a lot of
Yes.
things about how that process is meant to work.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we've had trouble, not just with recruitment, but retention, is because of the workload. And that was something we felt would be, would address that issue, hopefully, so that our retention of board members would improve.
I do want to pause on this one just in case there's any questions, because it is the larger section before we get into the rest.
Just to clarify, up there it says page 1, but in here, is this the part from page 6 that's being moved to page 1?
Correct. I apologize,
Got
yes.
it, okay. I'm just trying to, making sure I'm reading the right part.
Councilor Austin and I
Yeah.
had the same basic question. is there within this 15-page draft, I mean, is the section 2-452 now what's appearing on page 6?
So page,
As I see, we go from 2-451 to 2-453, and it says, see presentation details for 2-452, and I don't know what that means.
correct, so that is what I'm presenting to you now. What I'm presenting to you goes to page 1, section 452. The section on page 6 about the executive director, that entire section moves to the front, to page 1. And that follows the same structure as the Office of Human Rights. It establishes the commission, and then it establishes the office and director as the very next item.
So where it has section 2-455, the executive director struck out, everything below that on page 6 is going to be the new 2-452?
Correct.
And it says A, B, and D3 added, but I only see D1 and 2.
So 3 is on the screen. So I didn't put any additional new language that didn't exist in the ordinance already into the red line version. I put it on these 2 slides. And these 2 slides are the only new language that would exist being added in.
Oh, okay.
So this is 452A, 452B, and then D3.
Okay, got it. Oh, I see.
So what is on page 6 of the slides is the new 452D3?
Correct.
And is there a close to the quotation so that basically everything following the word stating is the new language?
Yes, I apologize. There is a quote missing there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Question?
It took a lot
Crystal clear.
of determination to try to figure out the best way to present
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
in a way that made sense. I tried other ways that didn't make as much sense. so.
I think a clean copy at some point would be nice too.
And that's what I wrote down, council, we're happy to provide you with that, but when we did add all of those sections and strike them out, I'm sure you all have seen documents where there are that many changes, and it just looks like a red pen died a very slow death. So we are more than happy to make sure that we provide that and also post it on our websites for transparency for the public of just a clean copy.
Great, thanks.
I promise that was the most complicated section.
Oops.
So going to the next slide, this takes us back to that page 1, and it moves into that section, the newly established section, or the newly codified section 453. So that's where we're picking up. And you'll notice in that first blue box, all that is a movement. We're moving the objectivity statement to where the membership is discussed, because it makes more sense there. It's referring to the members. That's all that is, a movement. There is no change to the wording. You'll see a blue box later with that same wording. And then if you flip over to the second page of the ordinance, red line, there's a strike indicated in there, a recommendation in the self-defense section, or in the, serious abuse of authority and misconduct section. And it's number 3 there. It says, acting in a rude, careless, angry, retaliatory, or threatening manner, not necessary for self-defense. It was the opinion of Director Gonzalez before me and mine as well that that statement doesn't make sense in that context, because you would not be using rude and careless behavior to defend yourself. So we just are striking that language because it doesn't make sense there. We're basically saying that, well, if it's in self-defense, then you can threaten someone or you can retaliate against them. That doesn't make sense. So that's all we did right there, is a strike. If you flip to page 3, this section is a newly established section, so it's an added section. Everything that's contained in it was already in the ordinance. It's just separating it out as its own independent section to make it a little more clear, called information access and limitations, because there's multiple sections of the ordinance that were spread throughout that talk about access and limitations to that access. So you can see up there in the top, access to department information. The only change that was made.
Is that slide 1 too far?
We should be on slide 7. Yes, sorry. We're on page 3, add, revise, and strike.
Thank you.
Recodified to 454. And then it's page 3 in the red line version. So the only change here is basically clarifying that access to information is administered by the director. This is the current practice, as this office and the chief has been very gracious in this regard, providing direct access to systems like the body cam footage, as well as the reporting system that CPD uses, the flock license plate reader system. So I currently have direct access to those. And so if the board is meant to access items, it would be currently through the director's office. And that's just clarifying that fact. There's also just some extra language in there that's not really necessary, and that's just struck. So that's really the only change in that section. And then you see the last item on this current slide at the bottom, strike 454H, procedures adopted. This is referring to the operating procedures. There is a statement already that we just looked at in that top section on the office and the executive director that has a statement about the operating procedures. So this isn't really necessary anymore because the operating procedures exist. They just need to be revised. This doesn't add anything to the document. It's still stated that operating procedures are needed and exist. So that's just a strike. And then lastly, for this section, and we can move to slide 8. There's a move, revise, and strike. So this confidentiality, and on the following page, it continues records to remain department records. This was information that was already in the ordinance. It's just moving it up to this section. It makes more sense here because it's specifically about information access, records, and confidentiality as it relates to that access. Now, I added in the board and the director about confidentiality. It never said anything about the director prior, so I added the director in there.
It just said each member shall?
Each member shall, yes. So I specified the board and the director. And then that's really the only change on that page. If you flip over to page 4 in the ordinance, there was a line that said, any other information that the board has deemed confidential. That does not make sense in this context. It would be the chief or the city attorney's office that would deem information confidential because the information does not reside with the board. The information resides with the city or with the police department. And so I just made that change there. And then you can see there's a couple strikes below. Those are not super significant. So that was really the only changes to that section. That was more of a cleanup, let's organize into an information and information access and limits section. And I can pause there for a quick second before I move on, if there's anything.
The, in E in the blue box at the top of page 4, there's the strike of which copies may be provided to the board by the department. Back when there was a conversation about the department sharing information with the board, does this affect that?
No, it wouldn't, because basically what the goal was on the prior page to say is that access is administered by the director. So nothing changes. There's still an SOP that defines that access and what access the board has, as information the board has access to. It's just clarifying that it's not coming directly from the department to the board. If that's the goal and that's the intent, there is a change of practice that would have to occur. It's also a much more complicated and less efficient method because I view that the whole purpose of the office is to facilitate that for the board. And so that was just trying to clear that up and make it clear that the office facilitates that process.
Okay, I just didn't want that to mean that there's no longer copies available.
No,
By
copies
striking
would
that.
still be provided, and I would hope that the language of 454A, the very first section, makes that clear. The board is authorized administered by the director to receive and shall be provided full access to all department records, files, records pertinent to.
Great, okay, thanks.
And the SOP that goes with this also clarifies that specifically.
If I can just nitpick a second, paragraph E, you don't want to delete the comma in the second line after department. It needs a comma after original records. As the custodian of the original
Okay.
records, comma, shall be responsible.
We'll make sure that's.
Sure, thank you.
Just for clarification, who is the counsel for PCOB? Is
At
it?
the moment. At the moment,
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, yeah,
Counsel as in the lawyer for?
Yeah.
yeah. Is it Mr. Maddox or do You all have your own counsel? I'm not sure.
It is not my office.
Okay.
We do not have our.
Mr. Mayor, we have none because of the conflict with using the city attorney's office should there be an issue between the board and the city. That position is currently vacant.
We can advise on day-to-day matters, just more run-of-the-mill things, but any bit of a case or any kind of
Right.
conflict between the department and the board, or we would need to associate outside counsel.
Right.
And
So,
Mayor, on page 7 is the section that will cover that, so there may be some changes in there that provides a little bit of additional clarity, but I think we were still on page 4, so you're ahead of schedule,
okay.
sir.
Oh, I see it. I see it. All right.
It's mentioned at the bottom of the slide, but.
Yes,
yeah.
in accordance to page 7.
Yeah.
Yep, we
Yes.
just hadn't gotten there yet.
Yeah, okay.
I apologize. I kind of paused midway because I just didn't want to move on from that
Yeah,
section.
yeah.
And so you can see that next blue box, objectivity, that's just where it moved to from where I struck it earlier, where we saw it. So it's just moved under the board membership appointment and terms. And then if we go down to the bottom there, bottom of page 4, you have terms. There's just some slight revisions there in the strike. All it did was clarify the chapter and article that was being referred to there. Made sure I found the specific one because it didn't really make sense the way it was currently written. Just said 2-8 of this code. And then also I struck that other line that was specific to the original Police Civilian Review Board and how their terms carried over. That's no longer relevant in the present and never will be in the future, so I just struck that language. So now we can turn over to page 5. There's really nothing on this page of significance. You can just see that blue box where confidentiality and records to remain department records, that was moved. That was scratched off and moved to that information access section. So that's all that's indicating, is that language went and moved up to that prior section. And so you don't see anything on the screen there in the presentation referring to page 5. And if you flip to page 6.
Can I back up a little
Sure.
bit? The terms portion that was struck, what does that mean? What does that mean?
So
What was it trying to mean, or did it mean and it no longer applies?
I believe it basically what it was saying is that when this was originally written, there was a police civilian review board. And I think the concern was that by creating this new ordinance, it would wipe the terms of the existing review board members and have everything start over. And that language was to protect those existing review board members to make sure they could continue until their end of their existing terms.
Okay.
So that is no longer relevant because none of those members are here anymore and we've moved beyond those terms anyways.
Great, okay, thank you.
So that was the purpose of that. And so I'm flipping over to page 6. We already looked at this page substantially and covered everything on it, except for that one blue box at the top, which is mentioned on this slide right here, move. There's a little line there about hearings, and it just doesn't make much sense there. And so we're just moving it to the section on hearings. And that was the only goal of that movement. And so now we can flip to page 7. This is where it talks about the board's legal counsel. So this section, there's only one core change, but it is a core change, which is that the way it was written, or the way it exists now, it says that the board and the board's chair can contract outside counsel. The problem with that as I see it, is that conflicts with the procurement process of the city. You basically have a volunteer board and volunteer members entering into a financial contract with an outside vendor, contractor, without much guardrails. There are some there in place, but again, it would make sense for the director to operate in that role or that capacity. The director operates in that capacity for any other contracted service that is provided to the board, so it would make sense for the director to do that in this regard as well. So that's all that recommendation is. There is currently an RFI that we have out there for council. Dr. Frazier, I don't know that we've gotten any response to that. Maybe there was one of interest, but.
We had some interest. The problem was that what we're running into is that the fees for outside counsel are prohibitive in terms of what our budget can carry. So it's kind of put us in a box because, you know, we're getting quotes that are quite high, $700-800 an hour. And we burned through a great deal of our budget a couple years ago with outside counsel, and we've just got to find a way to deal with this. Maybe there's a internal way to do it. I don't know, because we got two roadblocks. One being the potential conflict of interest within the city, and the other being the attorney's fees for outside counsel. I don't know if any counselors, you know, have questions about that, but that's why we are without counsel and have been for some time.
To add a point to that, and this is something that was not included in this set of recommendations, if you notice, inside that green box, there is a line that starts midway through. Such independent counsel, legal counsel, shall be chosen from a list of attorneys recommended by the city attorney's office. So that also puts us in a bind too, because we're supposed to be offered a list from the city's office, and that is often restricted as well. So there's multiple restrictions to getting independent legal counsel.
Right. And that turned out to be an unrealistic expectation, and that it just really put the burden on the city attorney's office when they don't have any more access to those names than we might, and it was just creating for them extra work that was not proving fruitful.
If I may, I do have some thoughts on that. I haven't been with the city long enough to really engage with this process, but I would be happy to assist with that. In my office would be able to help with this. I've dealt with a similar kind of system before, attorney recommending, creating a list for the to be chosen by an independent board. So we can.
Yeah, we would we would welcome that and appreciate that very much, Deputy Manager.
That was a sentence that stuck out to me too, because it seems like if there is a conflict between PCOB and the city has an advantage of choosing who they would be arguing against. Is that not?
Well, the idea
Yes.
is to do it well before the conflict ever comes up. So it's they're selected, and we live with the choice and the duties and the duty of care and the duty to represent the board to the best of their abilities lies with whoever's chosen. And if I don't like what they say, I don't have any ability to fire them. It's just because I made the choice.
And then the in the part that's not in the green box, the board's legal counsel shall be paid only from funds that have been appropriated to the board's budget by city council. So that also kind of gives another potential disadvantage. I don't know. It's
Yes. Yes, it does.
I mean, we don't have
we-
unlimited funds to spend
Correct.
on that.
Right.
So
Correct,
And we-
so it does require that the board spend within their allocation, but any of your department heads, staff, I get 5 apples, and that is what I have. What I would say though is that because the funding does come from council, the change that is being proposed by your staff I think is a good one, because it makes sure we are in alignment with any Virginia procurement laws and regulations. And the proposal of the attorneys by the city attorney actually can remove issues, because he will be able to know which attorneys may be ones that are on a list. For example, if we have a case with zoning and there may be a conflict within the firm, that also makes sure that the city attorney's office is aware of where this attorney may be working from, should they need outside counsel, or perhaps should Versa, our insurance company, suggest outside counsel. That makes sure that there is an awareness of any potential conflict as well. So while I see how it could be seen as maybe a little bit of a thumb on the scale, especially with what City Attorney Maddox stated, the idea is that he will help this board to identify an attorney well before a case comes up. And then he also knows he cannot contract with that attorney potentially for any outside counsel needs. They have an attorney when they're ready.
I'm just wondering if there's, all of us are not going to be the people having this conversation forever. So is there, a kind of like minimum we should set where it's like council funding will not drop below X number of dollars, or like something so that a future council couldn't go, we're going to take away all the money from the PCOB so they can't fight back, or something like that. I mean, I guess future council could change this anyway.
Your ability to bind
But-
future council action
Is limited.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
You're
Okay.
gonna have the same power that you have right now.
But see what I'm kind
I
of
do.
asking,
And I
yeah.
will say, just to tack on if I may, anytime we're hiring legal counsel that's gonna be representing the city in any capacity, I want a lawyer to look at it and make the determination whether that legal cap is gonna be adequate and has the proper capabilities to engage in this work. And I'll tell you right now, I would be looking at somebody who's going to be fair-minded and balanced and be a good advocate for the board. That would be my hope, and I hope in my predecessors who might be sitting here someday would have the same approach. So that, in selecting that list, that would be the driving.
Is there a, you know, when that list is created, those lawyers are also not going to be practicing forever. How often does that list get reviewed and updated? And is that a concern that by the time council action or board action is needed, everyone's retired?
That's a very good point, and I think that'd be something that would be perfect for a standard operating procedure, that we'll rebid the contract every so many years. Doesn't necessarily have to be spelled out in the ordinance.
Okay.
I'd also add, go ahead.
RWSA does the same thing, where they rebid the contract
Right.
every few years.
And that is best practice to take a look at that. I'd say that it's an operational matter to your question of funding and enough funding being available. Because this is a council-appointed board and you have direct contact with the board chair and board members, if at any time there was an issue that a future city manager, because this one will support whatever needs to be done, but a future city manager refusing, they can always make council aware of that, and then it could be addressed in that manner as well.
Negotiation is
Yeah.
available. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And we can move on to slide 9. So slide 9 starts off with striking section 457 as it currently exists. This section is not moved anywhere, it's just entirely struck. The reason for that is everything in here is redundant to another portion of the ordinance. There are a couple items that are included as part of the operating procedures, but they don't need to be clarified here in the ordinance. They're very specific to the process. There's nothing in here that indicates anything new or different than already exists elsewhere. So it made the most sense to just strike that entire section. And then if you look at the bottom of page 7 of the ordinance there, it's a revision to that title, investigation of complaints and incidents, changing it instead to investigation, exclusions, limitations, and suspension. The reason for that is this entire section is all about exclusions, limitations, and suspension. So it makes more sense to call it that because I think it gives a kind of a false concept of what is actually there. This entire section limits what the board can do. It doesn't give it any powers. It just tells it what the limits are. And so that's the only recommendation there, and we can flip to the next page, still remaining on this slide, though. So we're now on page 8. Item number 7 there in the list, there's just a small green box around it. It just says that such complaints would be referred to another appropriate law enforcement if it's not relevant to the CPD. But we changed that to, or the recommendation is to change that to complainants. It would not make sense for us to take all the details of a complaint that is not under our jurisdiction to do anything about. So it would be best to refer that individual to the other agency, which is the current practice. That happens from time to time where they're looking for Albemarle County or wherever else. And then again, looking down at the bottom of page 8, and the last item on this slide, is just elevating that subsection called subpoenas to its own section. And the reason being, it's a large section, has a lot of details in it, and so just making it its own section that has, just stands alone and stands out is the only other recommendation there. I'm flipping the page over to page 9 of the ordinance, and we can move on to slide 10. Oh, yeah, perfect. So in the large green box there in the middle, That just includes some strikes to language in in letter C and E. Both of those items are basically telling what the circuit court shall do. All that language is just indicating that the court shall do this and the court shall do that. I don't think that's relevant to have in our ordinance. It doesn't bind the court in any sort of way, so we're just striking that language because it doesn't change anything to the fact that the court can be petitioned for a subpoena, but what the court does is up to the court. So just taking that out. And then moving down to that bottom green box, that is also an elevation of a subsection called Conduct of Investigations. Just basically making it its own section so it's a little bit more, flows a little better, is a little more clear and separated from the subpoenas. This was a very large section prior. Now, the only main change inside that box, besides elevating the title, is removing the line that says with the department, with the department. That's repeated numerous times. Basically, it's saying that, as it had it, the director is meant to access all these records with the department. That is not the current practice. I know that the chief does not expect that to be the current practice. I'm able to access things independently of a department, police department staff member sitting there with me. I can log into the body cam footage system, Axon, and access something. So it's just to reflect the current practice that's already being done, which is direct access individually. And then, again, that would flow back into the ability of this office to provide that information to the board as necessary for their investigation. So if we flip to page 10, we're staying on the same slide there. Again, it was just that green box at the top said the same thing, just removing another with the department. There was one that I left, and it relates to real-time interviews of officers. So it says that the director can attend real-time interviews during internal affairs investigations of officers. That makes sense to say with the department because it is internal affairs who is interviewing them, so that can stay. Dropping all the way down to that blue box, that is something we saw earlier, the hearings section that I struck before and moved here, which is the section on hearings. So it just became the first item, indicating that hearings would be conducted in accordance with the operating procedures. And so that's all on that page, and we can flip to the next one, page 11. So this, we can go on to slide 11. Thank you. Oh, sorry. I keep forgetting that it's not mine on the screen. This was the operating procedures, the blue section down there at the bottom. The reason it has gold around it and blue is because it related to that Office of the Police Civilian Oversight Board, the executive director's role, moving that operating procedure section up to that. And then finally, that green box at the bottom is just a strike. This is, again, redundant language that is already contained in the hearings section. It's just removing all that excess language about hearings. That doesn't need to be there because it is redundant entirely. And it extends on to page 12. We're getting close to the end. All right, that blue box on page 12 about adding a section called alternative resolution. So the items that are contained in there are not new. They came from two different parts of the ordinance, but they are both related to alternative resolution. This is resolution outside of an investigation and hearing process that the board would be involved in. So includes mediation as well as informal resolution by other means. And so it's just saying, hey, let's move these and put these together into one place that makes sense. And that is all that is. And then I move into the disciplinary recommendations. I do want to emphasize that there are many other items that could be discussed and recommended and talked about, but again, these changes are specific to just fixing some of that surface level wording and the realities of how the office is currently operating. So one of the strikes here inside that green box says the board shall consult with the employee's direct supervisor or commander, complainants, and witnesses when discussing appropriate disciplinary action to be recommended. My predecessor, Director Gonzalez and myself both agree, and looking at the Virginia Code, This does not make sense to include here for a couple of reasons. First of all, there is no binding disciplinary ability given to the Police Civilian Oversight Board. The Virginia Code indicates that a supervisor should be consulted if there's binding disciplinary action. That is already done with inside of the CPD's process by the chief, who has the binding action. So that process is already done. It's not relevant to the board unless the board itself had a binding disciplinary role. But the other information there about talking to the complainant and the witnesses doesn't really make sense when it comes to disciplinary action. There is a very clear process on what disciplinary action can be applied to an officer. There's a matrix that defines that based on the allegation, based on the finding. So talking to witnesses about how an officer should be disciplined is far outside of the context of the current general orders, the current law, all of that. So just striking that as an easy strike because it's not relevant. All right, and then down to the grievance rights. This language, again, it is important, but my recommendation is that it is not relevant. So the reason being, we're still on page 12. The reason being that the grievance rights are only applicable to binding disciplinary action. Now, this exact phrase is already included in the collective bargaining agreement with the CPD. So they included this because it was in our ordinance, and that's fine. It clarifies that officers can still go through that grievance process. No power or action of the board can prevent that. But that's implied. So I think that it doesn't need to exist here, especially since the board does not have any sort of binding disciplinary recommendation action anyway. So that was what that strike was for. All right, and then we can flip to page 13. And please pause me or stop me if there's questions or anything else. In this section, it's just talking about the board reviewing law enforcement policies, practices, and procedures. You can see where this is where the blue box about the executive director's authority to conduct audits was located originally. So that's why it was moved up to that section right at the front. It belongs up there with the powers of the executive director or the director, as the recommendation states. So the only really change to this one is just taking that away and that green box adding in that language. That language, there's nothing special about it. It comes from the Office of Human Rights Ordinance. I just felt it was an important item to add, basically saying that to do this, the board can conduct research and engage with entities, organizations that are experts in these matters and policing and practices of the department. So that's all that box is, just reflects the Office of Human Rights. Moving down to the next section on the request annual reports of police expenditures. Again, the changes here are just to reflect the current practice. The way that it's currently written is very cumbersome and is not efficient and doesn't make sense in the way that the budget process flows. I currently have access to the police department's budget and am able to provide reports of expenditures in this form as it stands right now without the process as it's outlaid. So basically just saying that, okay, the board can receive this information through the director. Just like every other type of information the board receives, the director has access, the director can provide that information. And then moving down to the bottom section, this was a revision that brought a couple items together because they are all public-facing and community-facing. So bringing community engagement, used to be its own section, just bringing it up here, community engagement, legislative recommendations, and reporting. I got rid of annual because there's other types of reporting that are done. It includes annual, but it includes maybe specific reporting on a specific audit or a monthly report or a report on an event or things like that. You can see there are quite a few changes to that section on the community engagement. The goal was to take that full section and put it into one item and just clarify that community engagement should be regular, it should be collaborative, it should be guided by the concerns of the community. But what it does is it takes away some of that mandate to have 2 community town halls, 2 community listening sessions per year. We have only, I believe the board has only had one to date. It was last May or April, right at the end of April. I don't think this was never complied with prior to that. So this has only been ever complied with once in the time that the board has existed. Part of that, as board members have indicated already, is time commitment. It's very challenging to set these up and advertise them and participate in them for a volunteer board who has all these other responsibilities and duties. So yes, the board does engage regularly, as well as myself, in community events and other community actions and activities, but it's just reducing that burden some and clarifying some of that action. And then below, in the very, very bottom of that box, changing from annual reporting to just reporting and removing the date that the annual report is due. This also reflects the Office of Human Rights. There is not a specific date that is given. It just says, in the preceding year, the board, or in this case, I'm changing it to the director because the director really should be responsible for that annual report, is responsible for producing a report of the prior year. That we have complied with that in terms of 2023 and 2024 since my time here. That is kind of an unreasonable thing for the board to do as volunteers to produce annual reporting. They don't have direct access to the information needed anyways. So that is the purpose of that. All right, and then flipping over to page 14. And you can see there's a little bit more language that was added in that reporting section on the next page, just to mention it. All that's saying is that any actions of the director's office should be reported to the board. That wasn't clarified. So if an audit is conducted, for example, that should be reported. What were the findings of that audit? Or other reports that are taken as a result of specific actions should be reported to the board. And so that added language just clarifies that. You can see that community engagement section is the next piece there, 465. That is the section that existed before and was struck entirely and moved up. So that language is no longer relevant. It was just moved up to the prior section. And then lastly, the board member training. So board member training has been a topic of significance because of the demand that the current ordinance puts on the board. It requires 8 hours of training within 90 days of them coming onto the board. So if you think about the appointment process and schedule as it currently exists with council, we have members joining the board throughout the year at different times, requiring that training requirement to kick in each time. This extends it a little bit further and reduces the number of hours. I was in the last training that was held for 8 hours. I do not believe 8 hours is necessary to conduct the training that was conducted. I also indicated in there, or the recommendation is that the director can facilitate or provide that training. So using content from the National Association for Civilian Oversight, the point being that the way it's currently written would require us to contract with this entity to provide training or some other entity. That's not always necessary. They produce a lot of content, and it is the belief that this office can present that content to them effectively.
So I just want to chime in on that a little bit, because this has come up a lot about the training, and I would like to ask you all who we've appointed, have you all started that training? And is it modules? Is it like engaging, or is it like things that you already, it is kind of common sense? I don't know what exactly it is. So is it how and what's your name, sir?
Andrew. Yeah, I can speak to the training that was held in this room, especially if it seems appropriate.
Yeah, that's the 8 hour one I was referring to.
Yes. So yeah, so I was present for that and committed for it. Andrew is there as well, not to speak for him. It felt like it could have been more efficient. That said, the person that was delivering the training was fantastic. I thought she had an ability to speak to a lot of different cities, could adapt to what our specific cities' challenges were, what our specific groups' challenges were as the PCOB. I also appreciated what it was going to be starting in terms of how it was going to hopefully clean a lot of our operations up. So I thought that it was a very engaging sort of discussion with her, but I think honestly the discussion with her was better than the presentation of the material, which I could have received and reviewed in maybe an hour or less. That is not to dismiss the substance in that training. It's really just to say that I am an efficient reader. And so that's kind of my point there. And I think 8 hours is I think it may have actually shaken a little bit of the PCOB up a great deal to have had that happen, had the people who showed up show up and the people who didn't. And I think that's in itself a reason enough to kind of warrant.
So
yeah.
Kyle, I'm just curious, is this like, do we have to pay for someone to come here and do it?
That's how it's been done, correct. And so if that 90-day requirement kicks in every time there's a new appointment, we are contracting additional training each time at a cost.
And in order for our PCOB to be, not thinking of original, but to be authentic or certified, it has to go through this organization to get the training?
Only because the ordinance states that.
The revision in the ordinance will add flexibility for your staff as well as your volunteer board to engage in training that is meaningful to them. Perhaps, for example, a case prior, your board members may note that there is some additional training they may need, for example, from an organization that maybe does community facilitation, not necessarily NACOL. This will provide that flexibility not only for the volunteers who are willing to do this service, but also for your staff, because there could also be additional changes that take place in policing, some additional changes that they may want to bring forth, and it will allow your staff the capability to do some of the basic training. And I'm
Right.
hopefully going to save you a little bit.
You know, we don't have to get, at least I don't think we have to get down to the details, as long as we give y'all some flexibility to make changes as you.
And so
Yes,
this
sir.
would mean that if like a bunch of people join at once, maybe we do hire the person to have it come in, but if it's scattershot throughout the year, then it can be facilitated in-house.
And I do want to emphasize, this is stating nothing about the National Association for Civilian Oversight. They're a great organization. It's not about that. It's just about the requirements and demands as they're laid out here. And I did want to talk to them further about other options for training, online modules, that sort of thing. And so that's something I intend to do.
And that would also allow, as Dr. Dobson was saying, while you're training, you're giving the basic training to your new board members for that moment with Dr. Barr, I believe was her name, to bring her in for all of your board members to speak on that don't need to go through this original training. So it gives also flexibility for your seasoned board members to maybe just have that conversation that you found valuable versus sitting through the formalized training again.
Great, thanks.
You can flip over to the last page, page 15. You just see a little bit of additional language in that last part of the training. And just emphasizes something that Chair Frazier and I were talking about, how, and this has been done in the past, board members can participate in ride-alongs or sign up for the Citizens Police Academy that CPD puts on. Board members have done that in the past and have found it very valuable. So just putting that language in there to say these are options, these are ways that the board may request training and seek training. But it just is to reduce some of that burden on the board members of what is required. And finally, you see there the mediation section. That is what moved to a higher up position. So we can go ahead to that final slide, slide 15. And so I appreciate the attentiveness to very detailed revisions inside of this and recommendations. I know it may not have been the best way to present it, but it was the best way that we were able to come up with in a short amount of time.
I'll have to say it was much less painful than I expected.
Oh, good. That's good. Thank you. That's good. So this slide really is to note to the fact, especially to the community, I think, that there are many other aspects of the ordinance that are relevant for discussion that the community might have an interest in, or the council may have an interest in, or the board may have an interest in. What you saw today is mainly focused on the operations of the office so that we can provide quality service as the council intended, based on the spirit of the ordinance, so that this office can conduct its business. That it was not intended to take any powers or change anything about the board itself. And so just saying next steps, yes, there's a lot more that could be looked at and discussed. That wasn't included today, and that could be a part of a future process. All right, well, thank you. That concludes that part of the meeting, which was the only part, or the main part, besides community comment.
Well, I actually have a question.
Sure.
Or discussion item. Some of this is, like streamlining and, revising and,
Thank you. Sorry about that. So a lot of this is streamlining, revising language, making it all clear. Great. But some of it is tailoring it to the board as it's existing and as it's operating now, which is slightly different than maybe when it was created and how it was intended. And one of those things is the lack of quorum and struggling to fill not just the community rep seats, but the specific designated seats. And we recently got a report from the city attorney's office that this potentially could be a board where we could pay people to serve, if I'm understanding that chart you sent us correctly. It doesn't specifically allow or deny.
It does not.
Right.
But we could add something to this ordinance right now.
I do think there are some revisions to the ordinance where, that would make it essentially where it is an advisory board to the council, and add something to its duties to make it a function that makes it advisory to the council, which would bring it under the purview of the Virginia statutes that allows for compensation to advisory boards.
Okay. Because that is another change that could perhaps facilitate achieving quorum and making the function of it a little more smooth, and speaking to the intention that it was originally created for. I don't know when we have that is that a budget time conversation? Is that
Well, what I would say to that is, and Mr. Maddox and I haven't had a chance to dig deep into the research that he did to build the list.
Yeah, that was
I think what I would say to that is, from an operational standpoint, I think there is a bigger conversation that council should engage in, where he gets a chance to further explain the list and what else may need to be done, like in this case, adding the language to this ordinance, where else might changes need to be added for any other body that we would like to grant that same level to. I think that's been the conversation that we have had. It's been, the whole time I've been here, the conversation has been around, can we pay? If so, then who do we pay? Meaning, which bodies do we pay? Bodies of service, I should say, do we pay? We need to determine that, because yes, everything is a budget conversation item for me, of course. And I would need to be able to process that as a part of packaging that as a new practice, because we're not doing it today. That doesn't mean that we can't. And I think and Ashley, I look to you and say, if we remember, we might have done some analysis at some point, and a dollar amount.
No, sir, there has not been a dollar amount analysis because of the,
uncertainty.
well, the uncertainty and the barrier, because if I'm hearing correctly, and I apologize, I have not seen City Attorney Maddox's research, but if I recall some of the past research, it would require the change to being a certain type of board first, and then additional information. And because of those barriers, we never looked at dollar figures or comparators, because that was kind of a hard stop for your staff.
So then that means that we don't know how much money we would need to be able to accommodate a swift set of changes. So there's some work to be done. It's not insurmountable. It might be a phased-in approach. I think that's part of the conversation that I would say that John and I could have to figure that out. But that's just a matter of figuring that out and bringing that forward for further consideration.
Yeah, and figuring out, do we want to have like some guiding principle of what
Sure.
creates it, or a willy-nilly, as we like this one, let's pay them now. We probably should have a guiding principle.
But figuring out, I mean, and he doesn't have to figure out much, he knows all the language, but determining what the right language is, and then it just gets repeated in whichever bodies you want to elevate to that status. to make that possible.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Code of Virginia that you sent over, 15.2-1411, and it says advisory boards, committees, and commissions in a way that, is it advisory boards, committees and commissions, or advisory boards, advisory committees, and advisory commissions? Does that parallelism, like, that's a grammar question, so, yeah, I mean, that's a larger conversation for,
I think we can interpret that fairly broadly.
yeah, it
Justice
seems like it.
Scalia would have had a different interpretation anyway.
God knows.
I don't know if that's our guiding principle,
But
Guy.
No, just
What I can say is that I feel like there is actually more flexibility to provide funding to boards, but some boards it's specifically explicitly allowed in their enabling statutes.
Mhm.
And then I feel like this 1411 provides fairly substantial authority to do that.
Seems quite broad.
Really, it was the PCOB, because I knew we were having this meeting, I looked at specifically and said, well, I think there's relatively minor changes to enable that. Whether we want to do that, how that's rolled out as a policy matter, as a budgetary matter, that's something for the city manager and for the council to decide. But from a bare legal enabling way, I think there's a way I can hold my mouth and make it happen.
Great,
Sure.
thank you.
Could I ask?
Mr. Mayor, can I interject something here?
Yes.
And that would be, I'm sorry, to ask the board to give a full court press to the recruitment process to our board. We're really hamstringed at this point and have been for several months. And ask the clerk to extend the time that the listing is on the website, requesting applications, because we really are just in a holding pattern until we get a quorum. And as acting chair, that's a significant concern to me, and it hampers what we can do. It hampers what Mr. Walker can do on our behalf. We're really just dead in the water at the moment. So anything council could do to accelerate that process would be greatly, greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Brian and then Lloyd.
Yeah, so that actually raises the question, or ties into the question that I have on page 4, board composition. I certainly understand the sentiment and the reason why we have, for number 1, council shall appoint at least 3 members who are residents of public housing who come from historically disadvantaged communities, disparate policing. I just wonder if that, even though it's well-intentioned, if that's holding us back. If we lowered that number to 2 and maybe added a more flexible position. Yeah, I don't know what people think about that. I can certainly understand why it's in there at this moment, but it seems to me to have been something that's been a sticking point in terms of being able to actually find people. Maybe some language like that's the preference, at least 2, preferably 3, or 1, preferably 3. I don't know, but if our desire for the perfect is getting in the way of actually getting some work done, I think that that's a problem.
Mr. Pinkston, if I could respond, it has been an issue, and it comes down to practical things like childcare. We don't provide childcare. Many of those folks would require childcare to participate. In the past, there's been barriers in terms of transportation. There have been barriers in terms of technology. So I'm not saying we shouldn't keep those requirements, but we need to be realistic about the challenges that we put in the way of folks to fill those positions.
If I may, I think the idea of not necessarily making it an absolute requirement, but indicating a preference for,
Yes.
making that a favorable component of someone who applies to the board being selected. I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
I would like to see us entertain the payment before we make that change.
Change one variable at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then to see if that factor has an impact on that, because maybe they'll have some cash for babysitter, for Uber, or what have you.
Does
So if
the
I could-
city provide, could the city provide childcare? That's not a kind of payment situation?
Yeah, let me chime in on the compensation piece. I would prefer to help make that happen before we go there, because that becomes a little bit more challenging. It's not to say that we couldn't, because honestly, I don't know. I haven't explored that. I would suggest the compensation be looked at first, because we have heard repeatedly that it is impossible for some who really want to serve to be able to, for just that reason alone, that if we tweaked that, then we might be able to see that there would be an increased number of applicants. What I would offer to you, and this is really for council to wrestle with, because once you decide, I will enact it. If you were willing to make the decision that this body is that important to implement compensation, it won't take us very long to bring forward a change to make that possible. What I offer to you is there are a number of other bodies that you have that would be saying, well, why not us, and when can we get the same? So that's the struggle that I'm pointing out to you, and that we would need your clarity on how quickly could we go through working the list and determining which ones might we want to prioritize, and then I get to easily become focused on how do I pay for that. And if that is a tiered process, then I think we could roll that out for public consumption, that council has made a determination that we will embrace compensation for lived experience service on boards and commissions, or whatever different titles we have to use, but it will be a phased-in approach, so therefore we can make it clear who we're going to work with first and who we might come back to later. I mean, I think that is a reasonable way to roll it forward, and we just really take a hard, close look at the bodies that you have, and I believe there are 44 by my last count, so you would need to prioritize. And then I think we could get started.
Lloyd was, and then I'll get you out.
Well, I wanted to make 2 points. First is that, if I recall, I don't have the budget information up, but we had allocated $500,000 or something like that for the PCOB attorney's fees, which clearly we're not spending. It wouldn't require a major revision of anybody's budget to get that started fairly promptly. And I agree with the mayor that we've heard from so many people that they can't participate for that reason. I think we have to recognize that's a reality. The other thing, I just want to make a general observation that I like the reorganizations that you have done, and I will say that, and I said this before, that I think that all of the authority that was necessary to get started on doing certain other things already existed, but it may not have been very clear where it existed. I appreciate that. I wanted, just for history's sake, recall where the city government was in the fall of 2021 when this ordinance was getting drafted. We didn't have a city manager. We didn't have a chief of police. There was a lot of flux in the city attorney's office. There was a lot of issues around the membership of the PCOB itself at that point, and some degree of sort of scandal. We had a fairly new executive director having been hired. And so Bill Mendez, I guess, was officially the vice chair at that time. Maybe he was the chair. He and I were trying to write this ordinance, and finally, at the end of things, we basically said to Lisa Robertson in the city attorney's office and Pam O'Berry and representing PCOB, you all work out the details. And so a lot of what happened at the end, I think, was sort of almost catch as catch can, and we didn't catch everything we should have caught. And so the changes that are being urged, I generally like, and I certainly approve of. As a matter of style, I want to make sure that we are consistent with the style in the rest of the code, in the city code, and I'm not sure what that style is. I just have a personal preference for capitalizing director and capitalizing board, because then it's a little bit more clear what we're doing. But if we're not capitalizing it in other areas of the code, I'm certainly not going to fight about it.
We can check on that.
Cal?
Yeah, so I was just gonna make a comment overall, just as you're trying to make evaluations on where you're gonna put resources. I think one of the things that you likely would want to question is, how has the board functioned has it functioned sufficiently as it is now? Right, the purpose, I would assume, of that line that we're talking about and motivating people to join it would be perhaps that we haven't addressed whatever the members of those categories are supposed to address. And I'm just not sure exactly if we know if we have currently addressed that, if the board PCOB has in the past year or two, all these different things. And I think if you are able to precisely address how satisfying the board is in its performance, then you might be able to have a better sense of exactly that. I think the annual review that has recently come out is actually a really great way to kind of get at that assessment. But I would think that we are actually performing quite well. I say we now, but the board as it was in the past year or so, to addressing a lot of the concerns of the community. So anyway, I just want to put that out there as you're considering this, just to be perhaps very evidence-based in the way that you're thinking about your decision-making on that. And I don't know if we've established what that performance metrics would be for the board yet. That's it.
Michael, did you have anything, sir?
Sure, a few thoughts. One, I'm reluctant to say this, but I would maybe caution us on the payment, just in that, is the PCOB an advisory board under state law, or is it performing a statutory function that is not advisory? I only say that because it's a gray area. I'm not saying we shouldn't explore it, but we know that there are people who are going to challenge the PCOB if there are angles to do so. So I just don't want us to be 100% confident that under state law, this is an advisory board that can have payment. Larger point, all the things that have been presented tonight to me seem like pretty straightforward changes to make, non-controversial. I'm glad that we're in this joint session to have a conversation like this. I think we need to have more of these. And as you touched on at the end of your presentation, I think the most important substantive changes that we need to discuss as City Council together with the PCOB, we weren't able to get to tonight. I'm thinking specifically of the most recent annual report, as well as a recent document, comparison of Charlottesville PCOB and NACL's 13 principles for effective civilian oversight. And both those documents call for a lot of much bigger changes to the ordinance than what was discussed tonight, as well as changes beyond the ordinance to standard operating procedures and other areas of how the PCOB functions. And I think we really need to discuss those together going forward, because I think until we are reaching agreement on those larger structural changes, I think we're still going to be kind of spinning our wheels and not in the place that any of us or the community wants us to be. I'm just going to quote from the one document comparing us against NACL's 13 principles: gaps and areas for improvements. Ordinance and operational constraints risk undermining the PCOB's perceived legitimacy, especially when many of the stated mandates in the ordinance are not enforceable. This disconnect between the enabling local legislation and operational reality most negatively impacts the citizens of Charlottesville, who may expect the PCOB to fulfill powers and duties it is not currently equipped or permitted to exercise. And I know tonight's meeting was not about addressing that concern, but I just want to call out that we really need to have conversations like this going forward that are addressing that bigger concern that's highlighted there, because I think the need for independent oversight is still vital. And, when I remember some of the case studies, years ago, were pretty typical in that localities, at the very beginning, they pointed out localities typically create these after a crisis event that makes national news. there's a spur to create it. And then after it's created, a few years pass and the attention of the community and elected officials fades, and they typically don't work that well, or they don't work perfectly that first time around. And they reach an inflection point where the locality, after the attention fades, decides, do we abandon this or do we try to figure it out and create it as a permanent institution? And I do feel like we're at that inflection point right now where we really are deciding, do we abandon the concept of independent police oversight or do we figure it out as a permanent institution? And that's the conversation I think we need to have, which I know is not the purpose of just tonight. But yeah, so the recommendations tonight, I mean, again, to me are straightforward, but I think there's a lot more difficult things that we've got to get to that we, didn't have the space to get to tonight. And I'll end by saying, I think, the PCOB, it's not all bad. I mean, the PCOB, both the board and the office have done positive work that's resulted in policy change. That's been highlighted in annual reports, monthly reports, but we can all agree we're not in the place we want to be, and we're not in the place the community expects us to be. And a significant part of the community does not have trust or faith in not just the PCOB, but also how city council approaches the PCOB. So we've got some really big things that we've got to change.
Thank you. Yeah, this is certainly not the last conversation we're going to have on this. Other comments or questions before I open up the public hearing, the public comment?
I agree that what we did, or what is proposed here, is rather limited in scope, but I think it's a logical and solid starting point.
Yes. Is it George Dillard? Did you have anything, sir?
Right now.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no other comments, I'm going to open up the public comment. Would anyone from the audience like to say anything? If you can come up and state your name, and you have 3 minutes. Is that right, Ms. Mills? Okay. There's no public matters. Is there anything else you want to?
Yes.
Okay.
So what I would like to do is ask council to indicate some, yes, you want us to look at compensation and bring something back to you to take a look at. I'm looking for enough support in that space so that we can get to work on figuring that out in what I've suggested as a phased-in approach, so that we would take a look and we would identify maybe some key bodies to work with the city attorney on and determine this would be phase 1 of implementing or considering the implementation and bring that back to you. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes. Yes, for me.
Yeah, like not necessarily a PCOB specific.
That's right.
request,
That's why I'm
but
asking.
broadly.
Yes.
And there's different levers to pull, like if it's a per meeting, is it a per year?
Sure.
Is it based on the frequency? Do we
I think that's
change
what
the
we need to
frequency
figure
of
out.
meetings?
Yeah.
Do we change the number of people in the board? Like,
Yeah.
there's
would-
lots of variables.
Yeah, I mean,
to
one, we don't
consider.
have to create this. I'm sure there are other communities that have already figured this stuff out. We'll be able to spend some time doing that search as well, but I just wanted to get indication of that. And then I guess the summary, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Brian, Michael?
That's right, I forgot about.
I'm fine with that. I would also say, in addition, that City Council needs to look at the recommendations in the most recent annual report, all of them, as well as the recommendations in the comparison of Charlottesville PCOB and NACL's 13 principles for effective civilian oversight in addition to that.
So that's the second part of what I was going to say, is that under my breath, I referenced this was just the tee up, bite-sized pieces so that we can actually accomplish getting something done, because that's my favorite phrase. We will be back in this setting, so that is my statement to you. With James's assistance, we will coordinate when we're ready to bring a batch of things for consideration, for discussion, to make it possible for us to just continue to move forward through a process of fixing whatever we need to fix that allows this body to achieve what we desire to identify as their function, their purpose, and how to measure themselves. And I think the NACOL information is probably the best way to do that. So this is one of many meetings I would imagine that you'll be entertaining over however long it takes us to get through it.
Mr. Mayor and council, just so you know, Mr. Walker and I will continue to meet weekly just to keep us, the board, as such as it is, apprised of what's going on in the office. And feel free to reach out to me at any time as acting chair with concerns, questions, or whatever. I'm happy to meet with you, respond in whatever format. So thank you so much for your time and your input and your support tonight. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second, all in favor, please stand up.
Second.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll bring it to you.